Hey everybody, Brian here. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to edit the Steven Slate 5 script that comes with my download for Logic Drums to Anything. So that you can modify the script and it'll work with any imaginable Steven Slate 5 drum kit. So let's get to that sooner than later.
Moby Dick is dunked. The white whale drank some bad plankton.
The first thing we need to do is open Steven Slate Drums 5 so I can show you some of the nuances. Now for my example script, I use this SSD5 Classic, Classic Rock, Absolute Rock. There's no general core kit, so I have to choose something. And between these kit presets, there might be some changes. I haven't gone through everything, but in looking at different libraries and different categories and presets, I have found that things vary. You might have a kit that has an extra rack tom loaded. Some kits might not have the floor tom one. So there are some differences, and it's important to note those differences. Now what I have noticed going from kit to kit, it does seem like there are certain things that are stable, that stay the same. So the kick having a center, and then this double hit. Snares having these various hits like rim shot edge, etc. Rack tom 1 and 2 seem to always be loaded. The hi-hat articulations seem to all be loaded the same way, similar with the ride hits. And then the various cymbal hits. And the ones I've seen, they seem to all have the tambourine hit up-down loaded, as well as a clap, and a cowbell, tip and shank. And then with this particular Classic Rock, Absolute Rock kit, there are some nuances. So I'm going to go to the map. And so this particular kit has an extra rack tom. By the way, always make sure you're using the SSD5 original MIDI map. I think that's always there by default. So there's this extra rack tom center.
I know what you're thinking. Did he fire 6 shots or only 5?
And now notice this one says floor tom 1 center not loaded, but it actually plays something. So what that's doing is it's just playing floor tom 2. What else isn't loaded? These XL, XR cymbals. I've yet to find a kit that has those loaded. I'll show you in a bit how to go about adding an extra cymbal. I've yet to find a kit with these bell samples loaded. Same thing with the shaker. So those are the important nuances about this default kit. And I'm going to go into the actual script. So I have MIDI scripter loaded here on this track with some drummer regions where I vary things so we get percussion playback such as claps, tambourine, shaker. And then I converted one of these drummer regions to MIDI and just manually added some cowbell hits, as well as some china and splash crashes. Just so we can make sure that we get playback of various Logic hits in the target library in Steven Slate Drums. In this case, Logic doesn't have china or splash. But you'll see how the script is producing those kind of sounds anyway. So I open the scripter, and I go to load, and then you just navigate to wherever you have your download. I already loaded that. The script, Logic Drums to SSD5. Now I go to Open Script and Editor. By the way, when you first open it, you might not see this. You see this interface after you hit Run Script. So now I go to Open Script and Editor, and I'll talk about some of these specifics. So in all my scripts, I have a little section towards the top where I say what the script was written for. So for instance, this is saying that it's Steven Slate 5, the Classic, Classic Rock, Absolute Rock kit. This variable here, CC range is source. This 4 talks about CC control number 4 for the hi-hat control and how Logic uses various breakpoints to determine its opening and closing of the hi-hat. It took a lot of banging my head to figure this out, as well as what's going on with Logic and articulation IDs. But you don't need to worry about that. I worried about it. This variable CC range is target. This talks about how the target library uses CC control. In the case of Steven Slate, CC4, opening and closing the hi-hats. And then I did some trial and error in Steven Slate Drums to figure out its exact breakpoints. So how it's going from its fully closed to fully open. Here are the Logic notes. This won't change from script to script unless you're making changes yourself to your Logic note layout. Notice how Logic has some percussion hits. And even though we didn't see a shaker in Steven Slate Drums 5, I'll show you later how we can map Logic's shaker to some tambourine hits in Steven Slate Drums 5 that sound kind of like a shaker. This variable UN, user-defined notes, so you can do things like trigger, flam, ruff and roll in a target library, even if it doesn't have those kind of hits, because we can use some MIDI trickery for that, as well as adding things like a ride choke, which Logic doesn't have, but we can still use an unused note and trigger a ride choke in Steven Slate Drums 5. Likewise with other types of cymbal hits. In the GUI, when you click on Show Advanced Stuff, under User Cymbal Notes, you could change cymbals if you wanted to. If you didn't want the ride choke to be C-1, change it to whatever you want, as long as it's a note not being used elsewhere. In this variable T, this is the target articulation list, so in this case, Steven Slate Drums 5 is the target. And what I do, like I said earlier, I'm using the SSD5 standard MIDI map. So from kit to kit, all the stuff on the left is going to be the same, because that's just literally every single MIDI note that's in the SSD5 original mapping. And even the ones that are not loaded, I've written them out here just so that if you do have them loaded, it'll be easy to set up a script for that. And I make notes in the script when something's not loaded, just so I understand what's going on. Like these XL, XR, cymbal hits, shaker hits, bell hits.
Now,
And then here's where all the magic happens in this drummer to target variable. This is the mapping. So Logic's kick 1 going to the kick double on SSD5, kick 2 going to kick center. Here's how various Logic snare hits are mapping to SSD5. That's just one logical way to do it. And then using unused notes in Logic to trigger these kind of hits, flam, ruff, roll. So with flam and ruff, using this flam, etc. parameter. With snare roll, we can map directly to the snare rolls hit in SSD5, but that's just kind of like a short duration roll. If you want to have a longer roll where the length of the note is the length of the roll, then you can instead use this note and then use the flam, etc. parameter to do this with some MIDI magic. You might actually prefer that over the built-in snare roll sound in SSD5. And then with the HH control, trust me, I had to go down a pretty deep rabbit hole to figure out how Logic handles CC opening and closing, using articulation IDs and some really obscure internal remappings of its AIDs. So it might be better to not even try to understand this, because it might be kind of like comprehending the size of the universe or something.
then why wouldn't he use it?
The equation couldn't reconcile relativity with quantum mechanics.
So the bottom line is when Logic is playing HH tip samples, those are going to map to the tip CC controller in Steven Slate Drums 5. And then from there in SSD5, it'll play the various tip articulations based on the CC data that the script is going to generate and send over. Likewise with Logic's shank, it'll map to the shank CC controller in Steven Slate Drums 5. And then based on the CC data that the script is sending, various shank samples will be played back. And then there's no edge HH sound in Steven Slate Drums 5, so I just have Logic's edge also go to the shank CC controller. And this is what guarantees that the opening and closing of the hi-hats in Logic actually translates super accurately to opening and closing in the target library, in this case Steven Slate Drums 5. Logic has a foot close and foot splash, those map up. So all that stuff is pretty much going to always be the same for any kit. And then what might change is stuff regarding the toms. So Steven Slate 5 typically has 4 tom sounds. Logic has 3, so we're mapping 3 to 4. So Logic has 3 hits, and each one seems to double up. So Logic's low 1 and low 2 are actually the same sound in Logic, but I'll have that low 1 note go to floor tom 2 center, low 2 go to floor tom 1. And remember in this particular kit, those are actually the same sounds in Steven Slate Drums 5. And then I have one of Logic's mid-tom sounds go to that extra rack tom center hit that's in this particular kit in SSD5. Mid 2 goes to the rack tom 2, high 1 goes to rack tom 1. Likewise with high 2. And then these rim click sounds in SSD5, they sound more like just the hitting of a stick. So here's an example where it wouldn't make sense to use a one-to-many mapping. I mean, we could have a Logic tom mapped to either a slate center or rim click sound, and the script will choose one or the other randomly. But I don't think that makes too much sense here, so I'm using the articulation switching feature of the script, this AID switch parameter. So basically, in Logic, you can mark up the MIDI, assign a note to have articulation ID 3, and then any other time, it's going to play back the center hit, even if there's no AID. So I'll show you that in a bit, how that works. And then from kit to kit, the rides, as far as I can tell, they're going to stay the same. So Logic edge going to slate edge, Logic's in and out going to the tip and shank, ride bell going to the slate bell.
Don't try to frighten us with your sorcerer's ways, Lord Vader.
And even though Logic doesn't have a ride choke, we're using an unused note in Logic, so we can trigger the choke in Steven Slate Drums 5. Steven Slate Drum 5, it can do cymbal choking in a variety of ways. The script, by default, assumes poly aftertouch, but you could change that. If you wanted a Logic choke note to trigger, say, a choke note in Steven Slate Drums 5, you could do that by choosing target choke note. But when a library supports Poly Aftertouch, that's usually the best approach. And note if you chose Channel Aftertouch, it wouldn't work because SSD5 does not support Channel Aftertouch. So you don't have to edit these choke settings here. You can just do that via the GUI. Then Logic left crash, going to Slate's left edge. But if you want to get that tip sound, then use articulation switching. So I've just arbitrarily chosen 3. You can choose this to be whatever you want. Likewise with Logic Cymbal right, going to the crash right edge in Slate, or use AID3 to get the tip. Alternatively, you could use these 1 to several mappings where a Logic right crash would trigger either a right edge or right tip. But because the tip and edge sound so distinct, I think usually when you have a crash in Logic, you want that to be a solid crash sound in the target library. So this is probably a better approach here, using the articulation switching. And then China's and Splash, similar approach, using the AID switching. So we're using unused notes in Logic to produce these China and Splash sounds, and we can trigger choking as well. Now Logic's percussion. So I find the tambourine up and down sound in Slate sounds close enough to a shaker kind of sound, so that's how I'm mapping Logic shaker. And then Logic tambourine is mapping to that regular tambourine hit. But if you want to get the up-down sound, then you can use articulations, IDs 3 or 4. Logic hand clap is just going to that 1 clap hit in Slate. Then Logic cowbell is going to the shank hit, which is the more solid sounding cowbell hit. And then if you want to get the tip sound, then use AID switching. Or you could use the 1 to several mapping and have the target node be the shank or the tip. But I went with this approach. And then down here, most people won't need to even worry about this. This is for automatic detection of hi-hat, close, and splash based on CC data. So this is just specifying which Slate note plays the chick sound and then which one plays the splash. In the user manual, it goes into excruciating detail on all this kind of stuff. So if you really want to go super deep into this, you can get more detail there. In my first videos on this plugin, also go into great depth on all these mapping intricacies and how it all works. So you'll know the script is ready to go when you see this kind of output, that all the validation has happened. If you don't see that, that's always a sign you have to hit run script. And when you don't get any errors, that means you're good to go. So now with that out of the way, let's play this back. Now you're hearing the clap sounds. Now some tambourine hits coming in. Now some shaker hits, playing back as tambourine up down. Now we have cowbell coming in, as well as a china and a splash. And if you have the script open while you're playing, which can be useful to make sure that everything's going as designed. Hand claps, mapping to clap. If you saw a Logic snare mapping to, say, a Slate kick or something, you'd know something's wrong. But this mapping is working correctly.
Shit, he switched the painting.
Now let me talk more about this whole business with articulation switching. For instance, with toms, here is C2, which in Logic, that is what I label as tom high 1. So that's this one. And then I can just mark up the MIDI, add the AID3 to get the click sound. So those are those tom hits. The first one has an articulation ID of 1. The next one has 3. And it's the 3 that plays back the click sound. You could change that in the script to be whatever number you want. As long as this first one's not 3, it's just going to be the regular tom hit. So you could even have that be nothing. But once it becomes a 3, it changes to the click. And then you'll see that info in the output where the AID3 resulted in the rim click being triggered. And because script output can take up resources, if you know a script is working perfectly, then you can just unclick this show console output, and then that stuff won't get displayed ever. And then likewise with the crashes, where we can have the tip sounds playing when we assign AID3, otherwise it'll just be the full crash sound. And then again, the output shows that action going on. With tambourines, because Slate has 3 different sounds, you can use AID switching to get the up and down separately. Otherwise, just a regular tambourine hit. Then with cowbell, use AID3 to play back the tip sound, otherwise it'll be the shank. And then with the shaker, remember we talked about that, how there's no shaker sound in this Absolute Rock kit, but we can use a tambourine up and down sounds. In this case, not using articulation switching, just either an up or down will be played randomly, one or the other. So it's important to know how to use that kind of feature, especially with more advanced libraries like Steven Slate Drums that have all these additional articulations that Logic doesn't have. In those cases, there are various ways to get those additional articulations in the game using this script. In certain cases, one approach might make more sense.
What's the problem, officer?
Well, I'm investigating the death of Frederica Bimmel.
You got like a description, fingerprints?
I'm back in Steven Slate 5, and under this classic Absolute Rock kit, I just want to show what to do. If, for instance, you don't have the percussion already loaded, let's say you did something and the tambourine disappeared, or you have a kit that doesn't have the tambourine loaded. Well, in that case, just go to this Create tab, Instrument, and you have to find the library that actually contains the percussion drum type. So a lot of these won't have anything, and then you click Deluxe 2, and now I see percussion lights up. I see that tambourine hit. This is what I just deleted. I'm just gonna add it back in, so now we're back to how we were. And likewise with any other percussion kind of hits.
Might as well put on some music.
What would you like to hear?
What the hell was that?
KITT for easy reference. A kit if you prefer.
All right, so you might be wondering, okay, that's fine, but what if I have a different kit? So let's look at a couple different kits. So now we're gonna look at Deluxe 1, Deluxe Rock 3, and I've made some notes what's different in that kit compared to the one we used for the previous example, and which is the default script in the download. So there's nothing unusual loaded, none of the extra tom kind of hits, and what isn't loaded is just the typical stuff is not loaded. And the extra rack tom, even though that's not loaded, plays back as rack tom 2. It has the same percussion. So if we go to Scripter, so I'm just going to open the default SSD5 script, and then go to Open Script in Editor. I like to have both scripts open so that I can see what's changing. The beginning stuff you don't have to change, though you can make a mental note here that this is for that Deluxe 3 kit. It's not the classic Absolute Rock kit.
The IRS allows a one-time only gift to your spouse for up to $60,000.
Oh, shit.
That's just for your own personal bookkeeping. Nothing changes here because Logic's breakpoints for its hi-hat opening closing stays the same, as does Steven Slate, what it's doing with CC4 and hi-hats. So that's all the same. The Logic notes stay the same. The user-defined notes stay the same. On the left here, the note names stay the same as long as you're using the SSD5 default standard MIDI map. And then in this particular kit, the extra rack tom is not loaded. We're just going to play back as the rack tom 2. So you can just make a note to yourself. Everything else is the same there.
Okay, an oil rig on fire. Sir, what is your location?
And now onto the mapping, you might think we have to make a change because of what's going on between the toms, between these two kits. But actually, because these unloaded pieces are still playing back, the default script would still work out of the box. Because when the Logic node maps to this extra rack tom center or click, it's just going to play back the rack tom 2. And with the cymbals and choking, percussion, everything stays the same. So I'm just going to hit run script. We see no errors. By the way, you would see an error if you made a typo. So let's say you just wanted click to actually be clicks, rem clicks. And then run script, you get an error. And the GUI would also see the result of the error. The GUI just points your attention to it. Some target node not found, and the details are down here. And also you don't have this option to show advanced stuff. That's another visual cue that something's not right.
I'm Winston Wolfe. I solve problems.
Let's get down to brass tacks, gentlemen.
So you need to be a fixer, get things back to normal. So get rid of that S, hit run script again. Now you're back in business. Now we can hit play and everything will work. We didn't make any changes at all except for just making some notes that don't have any effect on the script execution. So the claps are playing. Now the tambourines. Here the shakers playing back as tambourine up down. China, cowbell, splash hit. And And you could look at every single mapping to convince yourself that everything was working as designed. And I can tell you everything is working. Now let me show you another example.
I shot the sheriff.
This time, let's say you're in the mood for reggae. So under SSD5 Classic, Classic Reggae, Reggae Ska, you might think, uh-oh, something up with the toms, and you click in this view and there's no output. But the thing is, you go to the map view, and we see that that floor tom 1 is not loaded. But if we click these on in this map view, you hear the output. So the floor tom 1 is actually playing back as floor tom 2 center. It's the same hit. Extra rack tom is playing as the rack tom 2. It's the same hit. And then go back to this view. It has these typical percussion pieces that we've seen in the other kits and that the script assumes are there. Everything else is the same, despite this showing as transparent.
You've seen these films.
And so actually this is the same thing as that previous example. So let me close out of here. So in Scripter, just like the previous example, we can make some notes to ourselves that this is reggae. And like in the previous example, we could make notes about that floor tom 1 and the rack tom not being loaded, but that they play back through the other respective samples. And we wouldn't have to make any changes in the mapping itself. So I'm just going to run script, play this one back. So everything's working, percussion is coming in as it should. So now hopefully you realize how easy it actually is to get really any Steven Slate Drum 5 kit to play back just with the default script. Now obviously if you're doing something kind of crazy like using an electronic kit, then all bets are off because those aren't going to have a lot of the kind of pieces you expect. And if you go into the mapping, a lot of these pieces that are shown as not loaded, they truly aren't loaded, they're not going to play anything back. Now I'm going to show you a couple other examples of the kind of things you can do. So let's close out here, go back into Steven Slate Drums. Here I am back in SSD5, and now we're going to look at adding an additional cymbal. So what you want to do is go to Create, and then here I have that Absolute Rock kit already loaded. And so now I'm going to go to Instrument, and I want to add an extra right crash. So it's kind of obscure how you do that. I'm not sure why they don't make these things a little more obvious, but you have to find a kit that has a crash that has XR in the title, or XL if you want to add an extra left crash. Now I haven't found a single library that has the XL, but I did find under Deluxe 2, there's this XR, and so I'm going to add that. And now notice if I go to Map, whereas before these XR entries said not loaded, now they're lighting up. The choke, edge, and tip hits. And if we go back to create, I want to show you what happens if you think you could just add one of these left or right crashes, which is what I was originally doing.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
So let's say I deleted this XR that I just added, and instead say I thought I could add an extra left cymbal by choosing that, dragging it over. Now I go to Map, and that doesn't add the XL. What it does is it creates a stacked version of the crash left hits. So now it's a layer of 2 crash hits, and that's not what I wanted. So let me go back there, get rid of that, put that XR back in. And now we're just going to modify the script, given that we have these 2 right crash hits to give us some variety. Now here I am back in the default script, and all I've done is I've added a couple of entries for Logic cymbal right crash and its choke. So because we now have that XR cymbal edge loaded in SSD5, we're specifying it here and adding it to that AID switch for 3. So what this does, it just gives us some variability. Instead of Logic's right crash triggering the same right crash in Steven Slate Drums and the same tip, Now, every time there's a logic crash right, it'll trigger either the crash right edge in Slate or that XR cymbal edge that we added. And likewise, when we add that articulation ID3, that's either going to trigger the regular crash right tip or the XR cymbal tip. And we didn't do anything with the mapping. We already had those entries up here. They just weren't being mapped. Now they're being mapped. And so I made those changes, hit run script, and there are no errors. And so now what I have here is just a logic crash right, with the first 4 are just regular hits, and then the next 4 are going to be with that articulation ID 3, and then I'll hit play. And then here we see in the output, sometimes we're hearing the regular crash right edge, and sometimes we're hearing the XR. And then with the articulation ID of 3, sometimes we're hearing the XR cymbal tip, and sometimes we're hearing the regular. And likewise with choking, because we've made the necessary additions here, that's what these next 2 hits are, a regular logic crash right, and then it's choke. And if we hit play, we're going to hear either the regular right crash in SSD choking, or that XR crash. And you can see the output regarding poly aftertouch.
How do we stop them? I think we're going to want to localize a storm over the boat.
Now another thing you can do, because we have those user-defined notes, say the cymbal, other 1, crash, and choke, we can use those to edit the MIDI and decide ourselves when we want to hear that XR crash. And that's what I have here. I'm just going to uncomment it out. Hit run script. And now what we do, just with that change, see all we're doing is we're saying that this other 1 crash is going to map to the XR cymbal edge. With an ID of 3, it's going to become that XR cymbal tip. And likewise with the choke. So now if we hit play, those first 4 were just the regular crash hits, then these next 3 were tip, with an articulation ID of 3. And then these next 2 are for the choking. Hit play, you can hear it choke. And by the way, you can extend the note out, that'll change the choke duration when you're using the poly aftertouch method. And if you change that to target choke note instead, now it's just going to be the same duration no matter what. So that's why I recommend using aftertouch if a library supports it. And again, in the output, you see what's going on with cymbal choking, etc. And one of the benefits of using these user-defined nodes is it gives you this unified approach to drum production. You can do this kind of thing, and it doesn't matter what your target library is. It could work in Steven Slate. If you do the same thing in Superior Drummer, you added an extra right hit. As long as you have the mapping right, this kind of MIDI and logic will play back correctly in the other target library. So it's pretty cool, you know, you accelerate your drum production in Logic, and then you decide you want to use some of the additional articulations and capabilities of the target library, you do some MIDI editing, and then you can play that back in whatever library you want. And that concludes everything. Hopefully now you have an understanding of what you would need to do to get things in Steven Slate 5 working properly. And I think you'll agree it's pretty straightforward actually. Very little editing to do in the actual script because of the commonality between various kits. And also you saw how to load additional hits like an extra crash, and the simple changes to make the script to get that working. And everything we did here basically applies to any other drum library because this is basically a drum mapping language. And so as you get experience in that language, you'll have a better understanding of how doing this in one library will translate to another library. So until next time.